The Zarin Collective had long been the undisputed rulers of the galaxy. A race of unparalleled technological prowess, they had crushed every civilization that dared to challenge their supremacy. Their warships, bristling with the latest in energy weaponry, had turned entire worlds to ash, and their soldiers, clad in impenetrable armor, had never known defeat. The Zarans viewed themselves as the rightful rulers of the cosmos, destined to bring order to the chaotic expanse of the stars. They had conquered countless planets, subjugating billions under their iron rule, and now they had set their sights on Earth. Humanity, to the Zarans, was nothing more than an insignificant blip in the vastness of space. Primitive and backward, humans lacked the advanced technology that the Zarans wielded with ease. The Zarin High Command decided that Earth would be their next target, not out of necessity, but as a demonstration of power. They believed that crushing humanity would serve as a warning to any other species that might entertain thoughts of rebellion. The invasion of Earth was planned with clinical precision. Zarin fleets, comprised of massive battlecruisers and swift, agile fighters, descended upon the solar system with terrifying speed. Earth's orbital defenses, cobbled together from outdated satellites and rudimentary space stations, crumbled in the face of the Zarin onslaught. The Zarin ships unleashed barrages of energy beams that sliced through human vessels as if they were made of paper. The skies above Earth were filled with the debris of shattered ships, human pilots barely having time to register their own demise before being vaporized. With the orbital defenses neutralized, the Zarans turned their attention to Earth's surface. They targeted major cities and military installations with ruthless efficiency. Waves of Zarin shock troops, clad in their sleek, high-tech armor, descended upon the human colonies, overwhelming them with superior firepower. The human defenders, armed with conventional ballistic weapons and outdated tanks, were no match for the Zarin soldiers. Entire battalions were wiped out in minutes, leaving cities defenseless and ripe for occupation. The Zarin Collective's confidence grew with every victory. They had expected the humans to put up some resistance, but the ease with which they crushed Earth's defenses left them almost disappointed. It was too simple, too quick. The Zarans began to believe that humanity was even weaker than they had anticipated. High-ranking Zarin officials congratulated each other, already planning the next phase of their conquest as they watched the human cities fall one by one. To them, the war was already won. Reports began filtering in of isolated pockets of human resistance, but these were dismissed as minor annoyances. The Zarans were used to such stubbornness from lesser species. They had faced it before and had always emerged victorious. They believed that it was only a matter of time before the humans, too, would break under the weight of the Zarin war machine. The Zarin soldiers, emboldened by their victories, started to celebrate prematurely. They held lavish banquets aboard their ships, toasting to the imminent fall of Earth and the glory of the Zarin Empire. They exchanged stories of their conquests, laughing at the feeble attempts of human forces to repel them. In their minds, humanity was already a conquered race, its fate sealed by the unstoppable might of the collective. Amid their celebrations, the Zarans began to underestimate their enemy. They overlooked the resilience that had allowed humanity to survive against all odds, the ingenuity that had driven humans to explore and conquer their own planet's harshest environments. They dismissed the reports of human tenacity as exaggerated, convinced that no species so technologically inferior could pose a real threat to their dominance. The Zarin High Command paid little attention to the growing whispers of human resistance. They ignored the increasingly urgent reports from the front lines, reports that spoke of human forces regrouping, adapting, and launching counterattacks. The Zarans had seen it all before, the desperate flailing of a dying race. They were confident that, like all the others before them, humanity would soon be ground into dust beneath the boots of their soldiers. But what the Zarans failed to realize was that in their overconfidence, they had missed a crucial detail. They had not truly seen what humanity was capable of when pushed to the brink. They had not yet faced the full fury of a species fighting not just for survival, but for the right to exist. The Zarans, so sure of their victory, were blind to the storm that was brewing, a storm that would soon turn the tide of the war in ways they could never have predicted. As the Zarans continued their conquest, they remained oblivious to the growing resistance on Earth. They did not see the humans who were rallying their forces, who were finding new ways to fight back against an enemy that had underestimated them. The Zerans believed they had won the war before it had even truly begun, but they were about to learn a harsh lesson, that in war, arrogance can be the deadliest enemy of all. In the aftermath of the initial invasion, human forces, battered and scattered, began to regroup. The devastation wrought by the Zeran collective had been overwhelming, but humanity had a long history of resilience in the face of adversity. Drawing on their knowledge of Earth's diverse landscapes, human leaders quickly devised a new strategy: guerrilla warfare. They knew they couldn't match the Zerans in open battle, where the alien technology and superior firepower would easily decimate their ranks. Instead, they focused on hitting the Zerans where they were vulnerable: supply lines, isolated outposts, and key command centers. Small, mobile units of human soldiers moved swiftly through forests, mountains, and urban ruins, launching hit-and-run attacks that left the Zerans scrambling. These human fighters used their intimate knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, setting traps, ambushes, and creating chaos in the Zeran ranks. The Zerans, who had expected a straightforward campaign, found themselves dealing with an enemy that refused to engage them on their terms. Every time they thought they had the humans cornered, their prey would vanish, striking somewhere else entirely moments later. The Zeran commanders, accustomed to the orderly destruction of their enemies, were thrown into disarray. Their advanced technology, so effective in open warfare, was proving less useful against an opponent that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The Zerans deployed drones and reconnaissance teams to hunt down the human guerrillas, but the dense forests and labyrinthine cityscapes of Earth provided the perfect cover for the humans to evade detection. Frustration mounted as the Zerans struggled to adapt to this new kind of warfare. They had always relied on overwhelming force to crush their enemies, but now they were facing an opponent that didn't play by the same rules. Reports began to trickle in from the front lines, detailing encounters with human soldiers using an unexpected weapon: swords. Initially, these reports were met with disbelief and even ridicule by the Zeran leadership. Swords? In a war fought with energy weapons and advanced technology, the idea seemed absurd. The Zerans dismissed these accounts as nothing more than the desperate actions of a defeated foe clinging to outdated, ineffective weapons. They saw it as a sign that the humans were on their last legs, resorting to primitive tools in the face of inevitable defeat. But the reports kept coming, and soon, the Zeran commanders could no longer ignore them. Skirmishes with human forces were becoming more frequent, and in many of these encounters, Zeran soldiers reported being engaged in close combat by humans wielding these archaic weapons. The swords, despite their apparent simplicity, were proving to be alarmingly effective. Zeran soldiers, trained in the use of ranged weaponry and reliant on their energy shields, found themselves at a severe disadvantage in these close-quarter battles. The human swordsmen moved with a precision and lethality that the Zerans had not anticipated, cutting through their armor and dispatching them with brutal efficiency. As more and more Zeran soldiers fell to these sword-wielding humans, the mood within the Zeran ranks began to shift. What had started as a campaign of domination was turning into a war of attrition. The humans, who were supposed to have been easily crushed under the might of the Zeran war machine, were proving to be far more tenacious than anyone had expected. The Zeran leadership, still reluctant to acknowledge the full extent of the human threat, found themselves increasingly frustrated by their inability to bring the conflict to a swift conclusion. Whispers of doubt began to circulate among the Zeran troops. These humans, whom they had been told were weak and primitive, were now pushing back with a ferocity that belied their initial vulnerability. The humans had found a way to turn the tide, exploiting the Zerans' over-reliance on technology and long-range combat. The Zerans, despite their best efforts, were unable to fully adapt to the unpredictable and unconventional tactics of their enemies. The situation grew more dire with each passing day. The humans were no longer simply defending themselves. They were launching coordinated offensives that disrupted Zeran supply chains, sabotaged critical infrastructure, and even managed to take out key Zeran commanders. The Zerans, who had entered the war with an air of invincibility, were beginning to feel the pressure of a conflict that was spiraling out of their control. The realization that the humans were not going to be easily subdued began to take hold. The Zerans, so confident in their superiority, were now facing a growing threat that they had underestimated from the start. The humans, far from being a defeated foe, were proving themselves to be a formidable enemy, one that was willing to fight to the bitter end. As the war dragged on, the Zerans found themselves at a crossroads. Their advanced technology, once thought to be their greatest strength, was being outmaneuvered by the humans' adaptability and sheer determination. The Zerans had believed that their victory was assured, but now they were confronted with the harsh reality that the war against humanity was far from over. The humans had not only survived the initial onslaught, they were beginning to turn the tables, and the Zerans, despite all their power, were struggling to keep up. The tide of war shifted unexpectedly one fateful day when a Zeran battalion, stationed in the ruins of a once great human city, found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The Zerans, confident in their technological superiority, had been preparing for another routine engagement, expecting the humans to fall quickly under the barrage of energy weapons. But as the battle commenced, something entirely unforeseen occurred. Out of the smoke and debris, a group of human soldiers emerged, moving with a deliberate and unnerving calm. In their hands they wielded long, gleaming swords, primitive weapons by any measure, especially compared to the advanced energy rifles and plasma cannons the Zerans favored. At first, the Zerans laughed, dismissing the sight as a sign of human desperation. But their laughter died quickly when the humans charged. As the distance closed, the Zeran soldiers opened fire, confident that their energy blasts would cut down the advancing humans before they could get close. But to their shock, many of the humans seemed to shrug off the hits, their armor scorched but their momentum undeterred. When the first human reached the Zeran line, he swung his sword with a force and precision that defied belief. The blade sliced through the Zeran's advanced armor as if it were made of paper, cutting the soldier down in a single, fluid motion. Panic rippled through the Zeran ranks. Their weapons, so effective at range, were suddenly useless in the face of these relentless human warriors who fought with an intensity and brutality that the Zerans were wholly unprepared for. The swords, made from an alloy that was unfamiliar and disturbingly effective, bypassed the Zeran energy shields entirely. Where energy blasts would dissipate harmlessly against the shields, these swords cut through with terrifying ease, severing limbs, shattering armor, and ending lives in an instant. The Zeran soldiers, trained for long-range combat and heavily reliant on their technology, were thrown into chaos. They had never been trained for close-quarters combat, let alone against an enemy wielding such lethal weapons. As the humans pressed their advantage, the Zerans found themselves unable to regroup or mount an effective defense. Their lines crumbled as the sword-wielding humans tore through them, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Back at the Zeran command centers, the reports coming in were met with disbelief. Commanders could not comprehend how an enemy using swords, a weapon from a bygone era, could possibly be defeating their technologically superior forces. Yet the reports were undeniable. Entire battalions were being decimated by these human warriors, their armor and energy weapons rendered useless against the sheer physicality and lethality of the swords. In an attempt to regain control, the Zeran commanders ordered their forces to fall back and regroup. But the damage had been done. The humans had found a vulnerability in the Zeran war machine, and they were exploiting it to devastating effect. The technological advantage that the Zerans had always relied upon had become their greatest weakness. Their soldiers, unprepared for the brutal reality of close combat, were being cut down in droves. The psychological impact on the Zeran forces was profound. The fear and uncertainty that spread through the ranks was palpable. These humans, who had been expected to crumble under the might of the Zeran collective, were now turning the tide of battle with nothing more than swords. The Zerans, for all their advanced technology, had never anticipated that they would be brought low by such a seemingly archaic weapon. Meanwhile, among the human forces, the success of the sword-wielding soldiers ignited a surge of morale. These warriors, who had faced down the might of the Zeran military with nothing more than steel and courage, became symbols of resistance. Their victories on the battlefield were not just physical, they were psychological as well, sending a clear message to both sides: humanity would not be so easily defeated. As word of the humans' success spread, more soldiers took up swords, eager to replicate the victories they had witnessed. The humans began to integrate these weapons into their overall strategy, combining the swords with guerrilla tactics to devastating effect. The Zerans, despite their efforts to adapt, found themselves continually outmaneuvered and outmatched in these brutal, close-quarter engagements. The tide of the war began to shift in earnest. Where the Zerans had once been the undisputed aggressors, they now found themselves on the defensive, retreating from territories they had previously held with ease. The confidence that had once defined the Zeran military was replaced with doubt and fear. The humans, who had been on the brink of annihilation, were now forcing the Zerans to reconsider their entire approach to the conflict. The impact of the swords on the war was undeniable. What had started as an unexpected tactic quickly became a central element of the human strategy, turning the battlefield into a place of nightmares for the Zeran soldiers. The Zerans, who had always prided themselves on their advanced technology, were now faced with the harsh reality that technology alone was not enough to guarantee victory. The humans had found a way to fight back, and it was a way that the Zerans were ill-equipped to handle. As the humans continued to press their advantage, the Zeran commanders struggled to maintain control. Their forces were in disarray, their tactics ineffective against an enemy that had embraced both old and new methods of warfare. The Zerans, who had entered the war with such confidence, were now forced to retreat, regroup, and rethink their entire strategy. The once mighty Zeran forces, who had dominated the galaxy with their superior technology and unwavering confidence, found themselves in an increasingly dire situation. The unexpected success of the human forces, particularly the effectiveness of their swords in close combat, had shaken the Zeran military to its core. What had started as a calculated campaign of conquest had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. The Zeran commanders, realizing the gravity of their situation, ordered a retreat from several key positions. These were strongholds that had been assumed secure, fortresses where the Zerans had believed they could hold out indefinitely. But the relentless pressure from human forces, who now combined their guerrilla tactics with devastating close-quarters combat, made these positions untenable. The Zerans, who had never before known the taste of defeat, were now being forced to pull back, abandoning territory they had fought hard to secure. As the Zeran forces retreated, the human offensive gained momentum. The humans, sensing a shift in the balance of power, launched coordinated attacks across multiple fronts. Their tactics were brutal and effective, striking at the heart of the Zeran war machine. Conventional warfare blended seamlessly with the sword tactics that had so thoroughly disrupted the Zeran ranks. Entire Zeran fleets were decimated, their advanced warships outmaneuvered and outgunned by human forces that had learned to exploit every weakness. On the ground, the situation was even more dire for the Zeran soldiers. The humans pressed their advantage with a ferocity that left the Zerans reeling. The once disciplined and cohesive Zeran armies were now fragmented, their lines broken, their soldiers demoralized. The Zerans, who had always relied on their superior firepower and technological edge, were ill-equipped to handle the close combat that had come to dominate the battlefield. Human swordsmen, now legends among their own ranks, led the charge, cutting through Zeran defenses with terrifying efficiency. The impact of these defeats reverberated through the Zeran leadership. The chain of command, once so rigid and unyielding, began to fracture under the strain. Blame was cast in all directions as commanders and political leaders alike sought to distance themselves from the growing catastrophe. Some within the leadership argued for a full-scale retreat, to regroup and rethink their strategy before the humans could drive them out of more critical sectors. Others, driven by pride and desperation, insisted on doubling down, believing that overwhelming force was still the answer. They called for the deployment of every available resource, arguing that the only way to defeat the humans was to crush them utterly, regardless of the cost. As these internal conflicts raged, the Zeran forces on the ground and in space continued to suffer. The humans, relentless in their pursuit of victory, countered every move the Zerans made. The Zerans, in their desperation, resorted to increasingly risky tactics. They deployed experimental weapons, devices that had not been fully tested and whose effects were as unpredictable as they were dangerous. They initiated scorched earth policies, destroying entire cities and regions in an attempt to deny the humans any further gains. But these measures, born out of desperation, only served to further alienate their own troops and demoralize their forces. The experimental weapons, while powerful, often backfired. In one instance, a Zaran fleet deployed a new type of energy weapon designed to annihilate everything within a wide radius. The weapon malfunctioned, causing a catastrophic explosion that wiped out not only the human targets, but also a significant portion of the Zaran fleet itself. Such failures only added to the growing sense of doom among the Zaran forces. The humans, for their part, adapted quickly to every new challenge. They studied the Zaran tactics, learned from their mistakes, and found ways to turn even the most devastating Zaran weapons against them. The human forces, once fragmented and on the brink of defeat, had become a well-oiled machine. Their commanders, hardened by the early days of the invasion, now led with a confidence born of experience and hard-won victories. The humans had become masters of both conventional and unconventional warfare, and the Zarans had no answer to their relentless advance. The Zaran leadership, watching their forces crumble and their empire unravel, became increasingly isolated. The lines of communication between the front lines and the command centers grew strained as commanders in the field lost faith in the decisions being made by their superiors. Some units, cut off and without support, began to surrender en masse, unable to continue the fight. Others, driven by fear of retribution, fought on in hopeless battles, leading to their inevitable destruction. As the Zaran forces continued to collapse, the remaining leaders faced a grim reality. Their empire, which had once spanned countless star systems, was now shrinking rapidly. The humans, whom they had dismissed as a minor threat, had turned the tables, and the Zarans were now the ones fighting for survival. The internal conflicts within the leadership only grew more intense as the situation worsened. Some argued for negotiating a truce, even surrendering if it meant saving what was left of their people. In the end, the Zaran collective found itself in a position it had never anticipated, on the brink of total collapse. The war that had begun as a confident march to victory had become a nightmare of defeat and disintegration. The Zarans, for all their technological superiority, had been outmatched by a foe they had underestimated from the start. The humans, with their adaptability, their determination, and their swords, had brought the mighty Zaran war machine to its knees. The Zaran flagship, once a symbol of unchallenged power, now floated in the void, surrounded by the remnants of a fleet that had been decimated. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, filled with a growing sense of doom. The Zaran leader, who had once commanded respect and fear across the galaxy, stood on the bridge, his confidence eroded by the relentless advance of the human forces. Reports had come in of human ships breaking through the outer defenses, and now, the unthinkable was happening. Human soldiers were boarding the flagship itself. The Zaran leader, cornered and desperate, prepared for what he knew would be his final stand. He had seen the reports, humans wielding swords that could cut through even the most advanced Zaran armor, leading the charge with a brutality that had shattered the collective's resolve. As he gave orders to his remaining elite guards, he knew that this battle would not be won with technology or strategy. It would come down to raw combat, something the Zarans had long abandoned in favor of their technological superiority. The humans breached the final barriers, and the flagship's corridors echoed with the sounds of battle. The Zaran elite guards, the last hope of the leader, fought valiantly but were no match for the human warriors who cut through them with a grim efficiency. The leader could feel the ship trembling under the strain of the onslaught, the alarms blaring as systems failed and the enemy drew closer. His mind raced, searching for a way out, but there was none. The enemy was here, on his bridge, and he had to face them. The doors to the bridge burst open, and the human commander stepped through, sword in hand. This was no ordinary weapon. It was a blade that had become a symbol of the human resistance, forged in the fires of war and wielded by the one who had led humanity's resurgence. The Zaran leader, his pride still intact despite the hopelessness of his situation, drew his own weapon, a ceremonial blade, more for show than combat, but it would have to do. The final battle began with a clash of steel. The Zarin leader fought with all the strength and skill he could muster, but he was no match for the human commander, who moved with a deadly grace, every strike precise and devastating. The bridge became a battleground, the elite guards falling one by one as the humans pressed forward. The leader, once so confident in his superiority, now found himself on the defensive, his every move anticipated and countered by his opponent. As the battle raged on, the Zarin leader realized that he was losing, badly. His guards lay dead around him, and the human commander, relentless and unwavering, continued to push him back, closer and closer to the command console. In a final act of desperation, the leader lunged toward the console, his hand reaching for the activation switch of a doomsday device. A last, terrible weapon that would destroy not only the humans on the ship but also the surrounding fleet. It was his only hope of turning the tide, even if it meant sacrificing everything. But the human commander was faster. With a swift, brutal strike, the commander's sword cut through the Zarin leader's arm, severing it before he could reach the switch. The leader cried out in pain, stumbling back, his vision blurring as the blood poured from the wound. The human commander, showing no mercy, delivered the final blow, his sword plunging into the leader's chest. The Zarin leader's eyes widened in shock and disbelief as he felt the cold steel pierce his heart. He collapsed to the floor, his life slipping away, and with it, the last vestiges of the Zarin collective's power. The Zarin flagship, once the pride of the fleet, was now silent, its bridge littered with the bodies of the fallen. The human forces quickly secured the ship, ensuring that there would be no further threats. The doomsday device was deactivated, the data cores were seized, and the remaining Zarin crew were taken prisoner. The message was clear: the war was over, and humanity had won. The human commander, standing over the body of the Zarin leader, took a moment to reflect on the battle that had just concluded. The victory had come at a great cost, with countless lives lost on both sides. But it was a victory nonetheless, a victory that would go down in history as the moment when humanity, against all odds, had defeated one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. The war that had once seemed impossible to win was now over, and humanity had emerged triumphant. As the human commander issued orders to send a signal to the remaining Zarin forces, declaring their victory, he couldn't help but think of the future. The Zarans, once the rulers of the galaxy, were now in disarray, their fleets shattered, their leadership decimated. But the galaxy was vast, and the fall of the Zarin collective did not mean the end of conflict. There would be new challenges, new enemies, and the road ahead would be long and difficult. The human commander knew that the battle for survival in the galaxy would continue, but now, humanity had proven its strength. They had shown that they could adapt, fight, and win against even the most formidable foes. The cost had been high, but the rewards were worth it. Humanity had secured its place in the galaxy, and with it, the promise of a future where they would no longer be the prey, but the predators.